Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Sanctuary. I hope you're all doing well. I have got a fantastic series that we are kicking off today. And to kick that off, I've got an incredible guest. I'm joined by Scott Rinear. He is a fantasy football content producer for IBT Media, Fantasy Data. He is also the 2022 FSWA nominee for the Best Fantasy Football Article Series. Scott, how are you doing?
I'm good. Like I said before the show, it's good to finally kind of meet you. One of my, I think I've been following you on Twitter since I basically first joined Twitter. I always enjoy your content, sub to your Patreon, love what you're doing. But it's good to finally meet you. It's noon here. I believe it's 8 p.m. where you are, correct?
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah.
So yeah, it's a good time to meet. But I'm good. Summer is, my kids are just about to get out of school. They're getting out of school late this year because there was a strike. The teachers went on strike at the start of the year.
Right.
So now we're paying the price for that, and we get out on Friday, but then it's summertime.
See, that's interesting. Ours are on strike, but it's only ad hoc days. So yeah, ours are on strike, I think Wednesday and Friday next week. But my little one's happy because he's supposed to be going on a school trip to a theme park on Wednesday, and that's a strike day. So he was paranoid that it was going to get cancelled. But we've just had an email to say
you don't want to cancel those days.
The teachers aren't going to strike. Instead, they're going to go to the theme park. So it's obviously too much hard work.
That works.
But we're going to kick off this new series. It's something I try to do every year, whether it be on different platforms that I've been on. But it's the sophomore scrutiny series. I think that those, sophomores players heading into their second season for Dynasty, that's kind of make or break for a lot of these guys, and they have the chance to be future Dynasty superstars, or they've got the chance to basically never be fantasy relevant again and probably just end up being roster cloggers. So we're going to talk through 6 main guys here to kind of kick off the series. We're going to look at some quarterbacks and tight ends, and get Scott's thoughts. Obviously Scott's a fantastic, slightly data-led mindset, should we say. So it'll be really interesting to get his opinion on some of these guys. So we're going to kick it off with the first quarterback drafted last year in the draft. Had a, should we say, disappointing, I think, start to the season. Not as great as people hoped. But Scott, are you a Kenny Pickett believer? Do you think that he could bounce back and be fantasy relevant for years to come?
I think he can be fantasy relevant. I'm not necessarily on either end of the, you've got your truthers and you've got your haters or whatever. With a lot of fantasy analysis, I typically fall more towards the middle, and it's not really any different with Pickett. He did have a fairly disappointing rookie season. It was interesting to see what was going to happen in 2022, just because it was such an odd, relatively speaking, it was an odd year for drafted quarterbacks. There was only one in the first round, and then Malik Willis, for instance, everybody was mocking him in the top 10, and he went much later. Another quarterback we're going to be talking about today went in the 5th round. So it was different than what we had seen in previous years, and then what we saw again this year. But he is the only one that went in the first round. He did not have a stellar 2022. You kind of expect that with a rookie quarterback, but some of the statistics are just a little bit concerning looking toward the future. I mean, one positive he's got going for him compared to some of these other quarterbacks is he's the guy. I mean, in my opinion, he's the guy in Pittsburgh. I don't think he's in any jeopardy of losing his job. He's the guy. He came in, he threw 8 picks in his first 5 games. Again, not super surprising for a rookie quarterback to make mistakes. And then after that, though, he threw 1 pick over his final 5, or one pick over his final 8 games. So he cleaned that up a bit, but stats were kind of down across the board for the Steelers, skill position players last season. Picked up a little bit towards the end of the season, but I mean, Kenny Pickett was near the bottom of the league in yards per pass attempt. QB ADOT, how far his targets were going on average, just was way down, which oddly enough, something that surprised me, I was looking up Deontay Johnson's stats, assuming Deontay Johnson probably had his lowest average depth of target last year because of Pickett's low. He actually had his highest average depth of target in 2022. That was just kind of yeah. So I honestly think QB 22 in startups, I think that's about right. A lot of times, the way I operate when I'm looking at rankings, preseason rankings, obviously I'm looking at the player and I'm thinking about the value of that specific number, but it is just a number. So I'm always looking before and after. Who are the QBs before and after? Who would I rather have? Who would I put him ahead of? And there aren't really that many quarterbacks I would put him ahead of in the current ADP. Jordan Love is right ahead of him, QB 21. He's unproven. He's got there's a lot of polarizing, opinions of Jordan Love, but I would consider potentially taking Pickett over him. Geno Smith is another one a little bit higher up, and I'm a Seahawks fan, so that might seem kind of weird. Geno Smith, he's not, he's not that old, but I just don't know. I think it's risky assuming Geno Smith is a long-term asset in Dynasty at this point. Yeah, I think they could move on. Seahawks could move on from him as early as next season. We don't know. So those are really the only two QBs I saw that I would consider taking Pickett over. So I really think that DLF has it right at this spot, which feels kind of weird because he's a first-round guy going into his second season. He should be more valuable than that. But again, a lot of the stats I saw, again, over those final 8 games, he threw 1 pick, but he had a sub 60% completion percentage. So he just didn't really do anything that gave me confidence that he's going to be an upper echelon QB in the NFL.
Yeah, I think for me, it's kind of, we look at dynasty quarterbacks in one of two ways. Are they adding that rushing value? Are they going to be the quarterback of an elite offense? Now, the answer to question 1 is definitely not for Kenny Pickett. Mm-hmm. The answer to question 2, maybe, but I don't think we're ever going to see a Kenny Pickett-led Steelers offense be top 5 in scoring in the NFL. So I think that immediately caps that ceiling of he's probably going to spend the rest of his career as a QB2 in fantasy. I don't think he's got that QB1 upside. He might get to a top 12 season, kind of like a Derek Carr, Kirk Cousins type, where they're, around QB10, QB12, but it's because they played 17 games and they've just compiled stats rather than they're consistently a weak winner. I think where the hate has gone too far on Kenny Pickett is that if you watch the games, he came out and those first, you said about how many interceptions he threw early on. He was a rabbit in headlights who wasn't ready, quite frankly. And I think that he looked like he was swimming and struggling to produce. But the problem was that Mitch Trubisky is appalling, and the Steelers didn't really have any other options than to throw Kenny Pickett into the fire, having spent a first-round pick on him. But as the season went on, and I think the problem is that not many people probably watch the Steelers games down the stretch, but if you go back and watch it, he actually really improved. And I think I saw an improvement in terms of his processing ability and his improvement in terms of his ability to make the right read and get the ball out on time. And you see it, you said 1 interception down these last 8 games. You absolutely see that processing and making the right decisions and not making those stupid mistakes. So I think that he is undervalued as a quarterback option. Now, I think that there's a lot of stats in there that are likely to regress. We've got on screen there 1.7 touchdown rate. That is insanely low. That is absolutely mind-blowingly low. If that comes up to, 4 or 5% touchdown rate, he's suddenly no longer QB 28. He's probably QB 20. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but QB 20, 21, something like that. If you gave him, 25 touchdowns. And then I think people are having a very different opinion of him. Now, do I think Kenny Pickett is ever going to be a, probably top 3 round pick in a Superflex start? No. But if you're looking for a plug and play, safe, reliable QB2 for the next 3, 4, 5 years, I think you can go a lot worse with Kenny Pickett. And I always talk about trying to balance my QB2 and my QB3. So if Kenny Pickett is my QB3, that gives me the opportunity to go and chase upside with my QB2. Can I go and get, Anthony Richardson or Bryce Young and really shoot for the moon in the upside, because I've got that safe, reliable QB3 that if my QB2 blows up and is awful, I've got Kenny Pickett I can plug in. Or, if Kenny Pickett is my QB2, can I chase upside with a slightly cheaper option of, you mentioned Jordan Love there. I think he's got that QB1 ceiling, but there's also a chance that Jordan Love isn't a starting quarterback next year. And I think that's where I'm viewing Kenny Pickett. I think he is undervalued currently, but I think that's because people are chasing upside as people want to do in the offseason. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Kenny Pickett is going to be the starting quarterback in Pittsburgh for 3 more years. You can almost guarantee that. I think he showed enough last year that he's never going to be what Sam Darnold, I can talk as a Jets fan here, what Sam Darnold was with the Jets, what Zach Wilson was with the Jets, where they're so bad that you're like, right, just get rid of them. We're not even going to take the benefit of them playing on their rookie contract. Just get them out the door. So I think that we're looking at him as 3 years. When you look at the quarterbacks going in the range around him, Russell Wilson, Geno Smith, Derek Carr, Aaron Rodgers, Jordan Love, Matthew Stafford, Trey Lance, Mac Jones, Jared Goff. I don't think you can guarantee any of those guys are a starting quarterback in the league in 2 years, let alone 3 years.
It's true.
So if you want safety, security, and a reliable plug-and-play option, I think Kenny Pickett's a great bet. And, we've got on there the trade value of a first and second. Those are my trade values. That's what I'm happy to go and pay for him, because I'm a believer in terms of sometimes at the quarterback position, you just need a safe, reliable option. And I think in Superflex leagues, it's not sexy. He's not going to win you a week. He's not going to win you a league, but he's certainly not going to cost you it.
Well, one of my favorite things, because I mean, admittedly, I just started playing Dynasty and honestly Superflex a couple of years ago. I had been pretty much redraft 1 QB for a while, really up until I jumped into the industry. But one thing that Superflex has done and Dynasty has done is it has made quarterbacks I would have never given a second thought to much, much more appealing. I mean, honestly, and this is what some very smart people taught me when I very first started playing Dynasty. I felt very overwhelmed. It seemed very daunting to learn a new type of fantasy football, but especially in Superflex, they were just like, never underestimate the value of a quarterback with a pulse, a quarterback that is starting in the NFL. Yeah. And so I really like what you said. I mean, yes, we chase upside. I mean, JJ Zacharyson says it every single podcast. That's how he plays fantasy football. He's always chasing upside. But when it comes to Superflex, you have to look at the structure of your QB position, like you said, and Pickett, where he's going. I think you're right. I think he's undervalued if you treat him as what he is, which is not a potential league-winning QB1, but one of those guys, a safe QB2 or a QB3 that lets you chase upside with your QB2. He's going to be starting. He's not going to goose egg you. He will always, relatively speaking, he will always be available in your quarterback slot. So, yeah, I like what you said about that.
And he's the perfect kind of quarterback that you can grab if you're trying to, if you're in a startup right now. There's a lot of startups going on, and you perhaps don't want to draft 2 quarterbacks in the first 2 rounds like a lot of people want to do, and you want to wait and scoop up, Justin Jefferson and some of that wide receiver value or something. You can take 3 quarterbacks in rounds 6, 7, 8 or 7, 8, 9 or something. Maybe you grab a 1 earlier or whatever. And he's the kind of guy that you can grab in round 8, round 9 that is just that boring plug and play. He's probably going to be my QB2 for most weeks. And it just gives you that floor that you can then, have the upside at other positions. You can chase the upside in the other quarterback spots. And I just think that as much as it's not sexy, as much as it's not league winning in Superflex drafts, that having that safety security blanket is really important. So we're going to go on to another quarterback now who I think the range of outcomes is probably a little bit wider. You touched on, you're not sure if he's the kind of long-term answer. So it's Desmond Ridder in Atlanta. Are you a believer that thinks that it could be one and done for him and the Falcons are looking for another quarterback next year? Or do you think he's going to have a little bit longer of a leash?
I think he's got a shot to have some staying power in Atlanta. Again, it's tough. There's not a huge sample size of NFL experience for him. I mean, the stat that I go to and a lot of people have gone to with Ritter as a promising thing, not just for Ridder, but for Drake London and Kyle Pitts, is that once he took over the starting role in Atlanta last year, their pass attempts per game went from 23 to 28. So from almost historically low, not quite as historically low as the Bears, but almost, up to more kind of average, still a little bit below average, and that doesn't happen if QB doesn't have some talent, and they're not gonna call their games like that. They're not going to change the way they call their games. Although I did do a little bit of research into that, and that stat's a little misleading because in general, their plays per game went up once he took over. And again, I mean, that's not a bad thing. Their offense was more efficient if they ran more offensive plays. But so their pass attempts went up, but so did their rush attempts. Because I always assumed, well, the pass attempts went up to 28 per game. So their pass run ratio must have shifted. It didn't. They were running it 35 times a game. They just were running more plays. But I think he showed, let me see, what do I have? One thing he's got going for him is Atlanta, great offensive line last year, top 10 offensive line this year, according to PFF, which is almost a requirement, a prerequisite for a young QB to have any kind of success. He does give you a little bit of rushing juice. I think you have it up there, 4 rushing attempts per game. So he gives you that, an extra little bit of floor there. I mean, Ridder, again, he's also not a guy that I'm, projecting. He's the type of guy I think in my earlier fantasy days, I would have been like, oh, he's on this offense and he's got Bijan and he's got Drake London and Kyle Pitts and he runs a little bit and his name is cool. So I'm going to totally overvalue him without any kind of evidence behind it. I don't do that anymore. He's got the 3rd round draft capital that, that's not the best track record. You can point to Russell Wilson. You can point to Dak Prescott in the 4th. You can point to some examples of 3rd round QBs who have gone on to great success in the NFL. But it's few and far between. So I don't see like some top 6 QB in Ridder's future, but I think he can win that starting job and keep it. Now, whether that's past this year, it all depends on how you project it. Arthur Smith, he needs to win, right? Like, I think that's the other thing that people misconstrue about this. You get into a fantasy football mindset where it seems like, okay, well, if they're not good, then at least see what Ridder can do, and then just draft another QB because your record's bad. It's like guys that are making millions of dollars running football teams aren't thinking that way. Like even if everybody in the world knows what's happening, that they're trying to get a good pick next year, they're not going to do that and potentially get fired. So that's where there's volatility with people like Ridder and the next guy we're going to talk about that isn't there with Pickett, in my opinion, but it is there. I mean, Taylor Heineke is the backup, I believe, right now in Atlanta.
Yep.
So again, not a world beater, but a capable backup. Somebody that it wouldn't be a big shock if Ridder struggles and Heineke comes in. So, that risk is kind of built in with that, with the 30th QB overall in startups. You know what I mean? That's kind of there. He's a guy you can get late. But he would be a guy that I would be, if I was in a startup and I was looking for my 3rd or just QB depth, he's a guy I would be targeting because it's a good situation in Atlanta. They were better last year than I think people give them credit for. I think they're a dark horse to win the NFC South this year.
I think every team in the NFC
one of the most
South,
wide open divisions in football.
Yeah,
so,
every team could win because they're all terrible.
Yeah, they could all have the same record at the end of the year. I mean, so, and there's one other thing I want to point out. Drake London. I love Drake London. I'm a huge Drake London guy, and I think Drake London, to the casual observer, you look at his fantasy points from last year, and he might be like, "Oh well, it wasn't worth the top 10 pick in the NFL draft," but he was. His peripherals, his market share, statistics, target. He had the highest rookie target share, I think, at least since 2011, as far as I went back. So basically, if you add some volume, if you sprinkle in some volume all over Drake London, his season last year would have looked a lot different. And I think that volume goes up. So London's just one of those guys. If you're just looking at fantasy points per game and you're not looking beyond that, looks like he had a bad season. Not the case.
Those underlying stats are absolutely wild, aren't they? I think for me, for Ridder, it's interesting. We had a really kind of a detailed chat about Ridder in my Discord last week, and I think off the back of that, I realised that I'm probably a lot higher than most people are on Ridder, and I think that there's a couple of things that I'm excited about. I think that this offense is going to be a lot better than people expect. I think that the Falcons are going to be a lot better than people expect. Last year, that defense was absolutely abysmal. And Marcus Mariota was so bad. The fact that he was started as many games as he did is absolute
one of the worst
sacrilege.
QB performances ever.
Horrendous.
So bad.
Okay. They spent some money on the defense and they brought in solid, reliable veterans. It's the likes of Calais Campbell. I'm blanking on the safety that came over from Cincinnati, Jesse Bates. Mm-hmm. Those are guys that, they're not going to be all pros. They're not going to be guys that we're talking about constantly, but they are reliable plug and play options that aren't going to let you down. And I think that's what this defense needs and is going to be plug and play, reliable. It's probably going to be league average. That means that we don't need Desmond Ridder to carry this team to huge passing numbers. We don't need Desmond Ridder to carry this team to win games. He can be a quarterback that quite frankly doesn't lose the Falcon games and allows these elite playmakers to go and win them. Now, to me, that sounds an awful lot like a team that Arthur Smith used to coach in the Tennessee Titans, where they had Ryan Tannehill under center that had a good defense that wasn't incredible but was solid, that had a really exciting running back in Derrick Henry, that had AJ Brown and weapons that could win you the game. And all Ryan Tannehill had to do was be incredibly efficient on play action. And if you go and look at the numbers, Ryan Tannehill in Tennessee Titans, the play action numbers are absolutely wild. And he was incredible on in-breaking routes. Well, you've got Drake London, who's a big-bodied outside receiver who thrives on in-breaking routes. You've got Cole Pitts, who is a complete freak of a tight end who thrives on in-breaking routes. I think that we're going to see Desmond Ridder be a play-action heavy pocket passer with some rushing upside. I don't think he's going to be asked to push the ball downfield and to outside the numbers and spread the ball all over the field. I think he's basically going to say, don't lose us games. And he's got, he's not going to be Lamar Jackson. He's not going to be Jalen Hurts. He's not going to have, 1,000 yards rushing. But he is more athletic and more mobile than I think people give him credit for. And 4 rushing attempts doesn't sound like a lot. But if you're getting, 20, 30 yards a game on those 4 rush attempts, and maybe you're chucking 5, 6 rushing touchdowns, that's an extra kind of 4 or 5 points on average a week. That means he only needs to be producing kind of 14, 15 points a game in the passing game to be a QB1. Like it's not that outrageous to kind of portray that. And because I think he's going to be in this conservative in terms of what the quarterback is asked to do offense, I think this offense is going to be wild. I think we're going to see people lined up all over the field. I think it's going to be really interesting how Arthur Smith uses all of these unique athletes. But they're the kind of guys that, he can throw a 2-yard dump off to Bijan Robinson, who can take it to the house for an 8-yard touchdown. That's still a lot of points for Desmond Ridder, despite the fact he was only completing the ball 2 yards downfield. Like, I think that he's going to not have to be an incredible NFL quarterback to be a useful fantasy one. And I think that, there is absolutely some inherent risk being a 3rd-round pick. The Falcons don't have anything invested in him. We could be talking in 6 months' time and he's been completely cast aside and the Falcons are looking for the next franchise quarterback. That's always the risk with a guy that the team doesn't have anything invested in because they have a bad stretch of games and they're out. But I think at QB 30 prices in DLF ADP, I've put here, you can go and pay 2 seconds for him. I think that if you've got, 2 elite quarterbacks, but you're lacking the 3rd quarterback in a Superflex draft, maybe just go and get Ridder, or, you can get him in a startup in that like round 10, 11 range. And it just gives you that safety net, because if he blows up in value, if he starts the season with 2 good weeks, he's immediately worth a first and you can sell him. And I think that sometimes people are thinking about Ridder as, he probably won't be a quarterback in 3 years and I'm playing dynasty, so I need to be 3 years. It's no. as soon as he starts producing, he's going to be worth a first, and you can sell him for a profit.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, the typical frame of mind in Dynasty is the 3 years. But I mean, people can't help themselves. Like, I can't help myself. Like, if a player goes off in a week, I mean, that's the thing. It's funny how on Twitter, at least, sometimes some of the most knee-jerk comments after like one play come from Dynasty people.
Yeah.
It's an odd thing because it's like, that's just one play. But you're absolutely right. At this value, you're really not risking a lot. Let's say he flames out in a couple games. Heineke comes in. That's the end of Desmond Ridder. Okay, fine. Like, that's really not that much you spent.
Yeah.
That's one outcome. Another outcome is he has a couple good weeks and you sell him right away. That's a positive outcome. The other one is he serves your team well as your QB3 for this season and potentially beyond. I mean, I hadn't even thought about it. I don't know why with the Arthur Smith connection, but the comparison to the Titans and Tannehill play action with some running ability, I mean, it's very apt comparison for Ridder. So, and I mean, he has the weapons. You're absolutely right. I mean, he doesn't have to be a world beater. And oftentimes we talk about this player is good NFL, but not for fantasy. Good NFL, not for fantasy. I think you're right. I think it's the opposite. I think he could be good for fantasy, and maybe not like a top 10 NFL quarterback on anybody's rankings. So, yeah. And he did also, I mean, as far as the rushing thing goes, the 2022 QB class, or was it 2022 QB class, Ridder was tied for the most rush attempts per game in college. 0.3 more rush attempts per game than Malik Willis. And I'll tell you who he was tied with in rush attempts per game on our next slide.
Well, that is a world-class segue that I'm never going to compete with. So let's go ahead. Sam Howell, I'll be honest, the belief that some people have that Sam Howell is the next coming of an elite quarterback is wild. I'm still not convinced that he's going to be the starting quarterback in Washington this year. But yeah, I mean, are you a Sam Howell believer?
I thought he fell farther than I thought he was a good prospect coming out. But he did fall to the 5th round, and I don't put every single egg in the draft capital basket necessarily, but I've done enough research to know the trends and to know the probability of a 5th round quarterback, having any kind of long-term success in the NFL. He also tied for the lead in rush attempts per game in college, threw for over 10,000 yards. He had good stats at North Carolina. But he only played one game last year. And it's not like he was sitting behind a Hall of Famer waiting for his turn, and he still only got in that one game. And Jacoby Brissett is a guy I've been drafting late or picking up off waivers in every dynasty league I'm in. He could be a free starting quarterback. He easily could be, because it's the same situation with Ron Rivera. He's not going to just be like, oh, let's see what the kid can do. It doesn't matter if we win or lose. That's not how the Commanders are going to approach the season.
Coaching for his job.
Not in the NFC East market. So I think he's got a very short leash. He might not even, there is no guarantee he's the starter week 1. In Ridder's case, I think it's pretty well set. He's going to be the starter in week 1. With Howell, I just don't know. So, he's pretty close to Ridder in ADP. So it's a much bigger risk, I think, with him.
I think for
me,
I mean,
and he played pretty good in the one game, right? I think he scored 19.3 fantasy points. I mean, some of that was on he had 5 carries, 35 yards, and touchdown rushing, which isn't a bad thing. But he only threw 19 passes in that game. There just wasn't a lot. There's not a lot to go on. There's just not a lot to go on that, with Ridder, there's a little bit more. With Howell, there's just not a lot to go on. So, I think he's probably capable, but the risk is too high.
Yeah, I think for me, I like Sam Howell. I love Sam Howell if it has cost me nothing to take the risk on him. And if in any world I've got any level of reliance on him in order for my team to be a success, I'm out. But if he's my QB4, if I'm in a rebuild and I'm not trying to win, I think he's fantastic, because if he produces, it comes back to what we said about Ridder. If he produces, even in the smallest thing, that he shows some glimpse that he could be the long-term starter in Washington, then he immediately comes first and you immediately flip him. But I don't think that's an option. I don't think that he's going to be the starter in Washington. I do think it's going to be Jacoby Brissett. But I just think that there is a world where Sam Howell has that upside that we're all chasing, because there's some rushing ability. He's got the arm that he can push the ball outside the numbers. And he does the things that are good for fantasy football. So I think that there is a range of outcomes where he could be a really good asset to sell in 4 or 5 months' time. But,
yeah, I would agree with that.
But yeah. I can't put any level of kind of reliance on that, because I think it's such a wide.
And the problem is he's one of those quarterbacks that a lot of people have as a sleeper. There's a lot of like quiet buzz about Sam Howell based on what we're talking about, the rushing ability, the big arm. He led the QB class college in big time throws, whatever that stat means. Just meaning he can make NFL throws. But it's just the leash on a 5th rounder is so short. They need to win. So yeah, if people aren't reaching on him, the people that do project him to have more upside than you or I do, then yeah, I'm fine. I'm on QB4, sure. Yeah. At no cost. Yeah. Sign me up. Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
I love stashing guys. If I can stash somebody like this guy and just watch what happens, I love doing that.
Yeah. Or if you're in a rebuild and, you can spin I'm trying to do this off the top of my head, but Derek Carr, Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins, Russell Wilson for Sam Howell and 2 seconds or something like that. Mm-hmm. I think that's the move to make, because you're giving the team that you're trading with a solid, reliable option. You're getting those extra draft picks, and you're getting a lottery ticket in Sam Howell, who, yeah, in 6 months' time, that trade might be Aaron Rodgers for 2 seconds, and you feel like you've not got anything. But equally, if Sam Howell does show any sort of flash, you can immediately sell and you made a profit. And suddenly Aaron Rodgers for a first in 2 seconds, you're suddenly delighted with that haul, aren't you? So I think as a rebuilder, he's the kind of player that I like going and getting, because there's that risk, because there's that upside, and the cost is significantly reduced.
Well, and all you got to do, it's pretty simple. All you got to do is nail the 2 second-round picks that you get. Just nail those. You're great.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, whilst you're here, make sure you're clicking that subscribe button. We've got some pretty exciting announcements coming over the next few days. We've hit the 1,000 subscriber mark, so make sure you subscribe, because there's plenty more content coming your way. Awesome. We're going to move across to the tight end position now. Not quite the sexiest draft class, and I think there was some disappointment, shall we say. The guy that led it, first drafted, Trey McBride, one of the worst seasons from a tight end in terms of yards per route run, and some pretty damning underlying metrics. We see him there. He's at tight end 21 in DLF ADP. Have you got any hopes that he can rebound and be a useful tight end for fantasy?
It's not a lot of hope. So McBride is probably who I spent the most time researching for this show, and it's honestly just because I haven't thought about Trey McBride in a little while. He just kind of disappeared from my thoughts. Like I wasn't super enamored with him, even though he was the first tight end off the board. I wasn't like running to grab him in any kind of drafts. But he was the first tight end off the board with 2nd-round capital, so you can't ignore it. And with tight ends specifically, you can't just. It's a little too lazy to just say, okay, bad first year, tight ends, he's done. With running backs, wide receivers, the historical data shows if you, for whatever reason, you have that bad first year, you don't produce, the odds of you producing beyond that go down heavily. I mean, it's just what the numbers show. Obviously, there's exceptions to that rule. With tight ends, it takes a little longer. It's not as damning to have a bad first year. That being said, you touched on his underlying metrics, his efficiency metrics, targets per route run, yards per route run, receiving yards per team pass attempt. He was. Here's what I did real quick. I'll try and be quick about this. for a recent article for Fantasy Data, I looked at rookie tight ends. So I kind of built a sample size of rookie tight ends to just rank them. So what I did is I took rookie tight ends who have achieved at least an 8% target share since 2012. So that's my group of tight ends, just in their rookie year. And 8% might seem arbitrary, but I made it 8% so I could include Trey McBride because he was just above 8%. However, it's still, I think is useful information. Yeah. So that produces 31 tight ends since 2012 who put that number up in their rookie season. He is the lowest targets per route run, yards per route run, receiving yards per team pass attempt, second lowest target share of that sample size. And then where it really kind of goes further down for me is he had a good snap share. He had a 62% snap share. That's pretty decent for a rookie tight end. And one thing I like to look at with tight ends is routes per snap. Routes per snap, because it kind of gives you an indication, okay, if they're spending a lot of time on the field, but they're not running a lot of routes, that's probably because they're pass blocking or run blocking, and that's not a good thing. So his snap share and routes per snap were actually pretty decent, meaning he was on the field and he was getting snaps and he was running routes. He's just not getting targeted and he's not efficient with those routes. So that to me, even though, it's like, well, it's just a bad first year, it could pick up that, the fact that he was getting, he had Zach Ertz in front of him, but he's not the first rookie tight end to have an established tight end one on the team he's playing on his rookie year. That's pretty much the case all the time. But the fact that he was getting on the field and he was running routes, and he wasn't producing with those routes, that to me, then you're just focusing on him. He wasn't producing with the routes he was running. So to me, that's the biggest red flag for McBride.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point you make there in terms of, he was kept in to block on passing plays less than 8% of the time last year. You also look at his run blocking stuff, and now I know not everyone loves PFF, but his run blocking grade was 46.3. So he's a significantly below average run blocker. And it's like, okay, so he's not producing in the passing game. He was bad as a run blocker. He's not being kept in to pass protect. So what are we hanging our hat on? And I really struggle because I was a massive Trey McBride believer last year coming out in the draft. I loved his potential. I loved the talent. I loved the draft capital. I loved the landing spot. I was really excited. Now, I'm not really a believer in young tight ends because I just think that they're such a high risk, low reward proposition. And I did this study 2 years ago where basically if you take all the tight ends that are in outside the top 8 in DLF ADP and aged below 25, and their chance of having a fantasy relevant season in the next 2 years is less than 33%. And the chance of their value decreasing in terms of ADP value the year after is 60%.
Yeah.
So if we're looking at Trey McBride, we're saying there's a 60% chance that he decreases in value. And there's only a 33% chance that he's a top 12 tight end in the next 2 years. That's pretty scary in terms of the numbers. So I really struggle with Trey McBride because I really like him. I think his value is really low to the point where you're not really having to spend up to acquire him. And it's like 12 months ago, I love the prospect. I love the talent. I love the landing spot. Zach Ertz is coming back from injury. He could be a really big part of this offense that's lost receiving weapons. But everything's pointing to he's probably going to disappoint. And that's where we're talking through because I literally don't know what to make on Trey McBride. I feel like I could wake up on a day and I could argue that he's a fantastic value and we should go out and buy him, or he's never going to be anything you should go and sell. So yeah, make up your own mind, listeners, viewers, as to what you want to do with Trey McBride, because he's probably one of like 3 players in the league that I don't know what to do with.
Well, and honestly, he's one of those players for me where if I don't have him, I'm not trying to acquire him. Because one of 2 things can happen. Simply put, in 2023, he could either break out or he could show something where it's like his value starts to climb back up, or he could do something similar, and then he's on your waiver wire. Then maybe you could think about grabbing him because of the data showing it takes longer for tight ends. It takes them longer. Now, with all these like historical studies, like I did another one where I looked at second round tight ends. How many second round tight ends? That's it. If they were in the second round the last 12 years or whatever, how many had a top 12 season at some point in the first 3 years? Some point. Because none have had it in the first year, not one. And it's 5 of 18 second rounders since like 2012 have at some point first 3 years hit a top 12 season. That's 31%. That's not terrible. But, I bet if I then went a little bit further into that study and looked at their underlying metrics for the first year, the ones that did were much, much better than Trey McBride. Yeah. So that you have to kind of combine stuff when you're looking at historical trends. At least I try to.
Yeah, and I think he's a difficult one because it's like you said there, I'm not looking to go and acquire him. If I've got him, I'm probably not trying to sell him because what are you getting in a trade? Like I'd be shocked if someone will pay you a second for him. So it's like you can't sell him. I don't want to buy him. So he's just kind of sat there, and it's like it'll be interesting to watch because I really hope that he can produce. But as you said, those underlying metrics are absolutely damning. So moving on to the next guy who had a slightly more impressive rookie season, shall we say? Definitely flashed in spurts. Obviously had the injury to start the year. Greg Dulcich, he's currently tight end 13 in DLF ADP. Are you a believer that Dulcich can break into that kind of, we're not going to say top tier, but kind of second tier of tight ends along with your Pat Freiermuth and Dallas Goedert's potentially as soon as this year?
I actually do. This was a guy that I wasn't expecting him to put up the season he did. Tight end 28, that's not really what I'm talking about. I'm not really talking about that. I'm talking more about kind of some of his underlying metrics, how efficient he was as a tight end, and how well he played in an offense that sputtered, especially the passing game all season long. Now I don't think Sean Payton is just going to magically make them the number one offense in the league, but I think things are going to be a lot better this year under Sean Payton. But of that same group of tight ends, the 31 tight ends who have achieved an 8% target share in their rookie season, in target share and receiving yards per team pass attempt, he was 4th on that list behind Kyle Pitts, Evan Ingram, and Jordan Reed. That's it.
Wow.
In both those statistics, he was the 6th he had the 6th highest rookie points per game. And that might seem weird, but rookie tight ends just don't score a lot of fantasy points. They just don't. It just doesn't happen. That's why when Kyle Pitts didn't redefine the tight end position his rookie year and everybody jumped ship, I'm like, you guys need to just chill. The highest, at least in the last 12 years, the highest points per game in PPR for a rookie tight end, 12.7 by Jordan Reed. 12.7. That's not very high. That's the highest in over a decade. So Dulcich is another one of those guys I'm looking at some of the peripherals, some of his advanced analytics, and they are very promising. Now, Broncos have at least this year, they have a pretty crowded pass catching group. You've got Judy, you've got Sutton.
I know you're going to mention my guy, Tim Patrick.
Tim Patrick. Yeah. He's my guy too. I haven't given up on Tim Patrick yet. You've got KJ Hamler that I think he's still on the team, might do some things.
Currently, yeah.
Javonte Williams, if he's healthy, he catches Pat. You know what I mean? And so he's not in a scenario where he's going to lead his team in targets. He's not in one of those ideal tight end scenarios. But I think with what he showed last year, I think with what the improvement's going to be in Denver under Sean Payton, I think he could jump up into that top 12 range.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I'm not somebody that buys into off-season hype. And I try to read as much as I can and listen to as little as possible from that stuff that I read, because I think that, NFL beat writers basically have to try and justify their jobs a lot of the time in the off season and kind of come up with stuff to write. However, the one thing that's come out so far this off season that I find absolutely fascinating is Sean Payton coming out and saying, Greg Dulcich is going to play my Joker role, which to me, that's like, wow, okay, this is really exciting, because for those people that don't know, Sean Payton's Joker role is basically, this is a guy that I'm going to move around the entire offense, and I'm going to create option routes for the quarterback to be able to get the ball in his hands all over the field. Okay. That is really, really exciting, because that's basically saying the quarterback is going to have a read for Greg Dulcich on every single play. And depending on how the defense line up, Greg Dulcich is, more than likely going to have a route option that he can get open, and he's going to get force fed the ball. And that is so exciting. And yes, they've got an incredibly crowded receiving room, but the fact that Greg Dulcich is going to play this role is to me, a massive thing that I don't think has been talked about enough. You look at last year, he played 237 snaps as an inline tight end, 229 in the slot. I wouldn't be shocked to see that tilt towards kind of 60, 70% as a wide receiver, rather than being kind of 55% as an inline blocker. So I'm really excited that Greg Dulcich flashed as a rookie. He's got, as you said, some fantastic underlying metrics, and is going to be a movable piece on an offense with an offensive mind that we know when he gets a player that is a matchup weapon, he just spams that guy. This is an offensive coach that had Marcus Colston as a wide receiver 1 in his rookie year. Like, when the guy likes a guy, he force feeds him the ball.
And Jimmy Graham's
Jimmy
Graham's best years too, And I know that for a fact, because when Jimmy Graham came to Seattle, it was not the same.
Absolutely. But then I keep coming back to this thing of, do I want to invest in young tight ends when I can just go and pay a little bit more and get reliable options? So
it's true. Yeah. I mean, it's a really tough predicament, because it's like, if you follow the logic path to the end, it's like, okay, well, I'm just never drafting a tight end that's until they're a third or fourth year player.
And that's pretty much what I do. I don't draft tight ends in rookie drafts, and if I've got a young guy that I can pick up,
I typically don't in rookie drafts. Although I did a startup a few weeks back, and it was like right in the height of my rookie analysis. So like, I was just, all I had in my head were rookies, and you can see it in my startup. I ended up taking a lot of rookies, but in that particular draft, I couldn't pass on Kincaid where he was going, even though my brain knows it's probably not the best investment.
But he's not really a tight end, is he? We can call him a tight end, but he's a slot receiver. Yeah.
Well, and of course that logic creeps in your head. You're like, well, we're always looking for outliers. I just found one. I'm smart. That's why I did that. That's why I made that pick. It'll work this time.
Yeah. So we'll come on to our last guy. It's a guy that I think the hype is out of control.
A little bit out of control.
We've seen some fantastic underlying numbers. You can see on the screen there, 26% targets per route run, 2.5 yards per route run. Chigoziem Okonkwo, do you think that he's the next thing? Or are we just small sample size and get things again now overblown?
I think the hype's overblown. I do. He has some numbers that you cannot argue with, though. That 2.5 yards per out run, again, 31 tight ends, 8% target share in their rookie year, last 10 years, the highest. Number 1. Third highest targets per route run. Third highest, say what you want about PFF grades, but third highest rookie tight end PFF grade, behind Pitts and Jordan Reed. He has a stack of numbers that are very impressive. So the reason he was tight end 21 is because he wasn't on the field a lot. He had a relatively lower snap share. He was kind of the opposite of Trey McBride in a way. McBride got on the field a lot, ran a lot of routes, wasn't very good with them. He didn't get on the field as much, didn't run nearly as many routes, but he was very efficient with the routes he ran. So I think the potential is there. It's the timeless quest we have with fantasy players is, will he get the volume? Will he get the volume necessary in Tennessee? And I just don't know if he will. Say what you want, but Treylon Burks and Robert Woods, if he's fully healthy, they're two capable receivers. This team runs quite a fourth highest run rate in the NFL last year. Well over 50% run rate. I just don't know. And he's a good blocker. There's a reason why he's on the field and not running as many routes. He serves other purposes, which in the fantasy circles, we will scream until we're blue in the face. Stop having him block. Just have him run routes. We need fantasy points. But the NFL, they're not going to listen to that. So he's a tricky one for me. It's too much hype right now. I'm not going to probably end up with him in any startups or anything like that, or really even probably redraft. I probably won't end up with him because I'm not going to be willing to spend where that is. I do believe he's very talented. I believe if he were in a situation where he was more of a target hog, that he could. He could. He showed that he could. I mean, it's only 1 year, but like, you can't argue with those numbers. You really can't, even if it's a smaller sample size. If it was just yards per route run, that's it. Sure, we could be, okay, sample size is skewed, but there's a stack of important and sticky metrics where he excelled. The volume just wasn't there. He just wasn't on the field enough and running enough routes.
Yeah, I think when I talk about young tight ends that I think get overhyped, he's exactly it. We saw a small sample size. There's a reason why he didn't get on the field. He didn't play more than 38 snaps in any game. He was on the field more. He's the only rookie tight end that was on the field more as a blocker than a receiver. So he ran 180 routes and was on the field for 196 blocking plays. Like every other rookie tight end ran more routes than blocked. And I think that there's a reason why. Yeah, he could absolutely have some weeks just because there aren't enough passing options in that offense where he could have some spike weeks and catch a touchdown and things like that. I just don't know if this offense, if he's going to be a good enough route runner to be a consistent, reliable fantasy option. And to me, that says, I think you've got to sell. And I think that if you can play off that hype that there is at the moment, because there are I can guarantee you there's an Okonkwo believer in every single league you are in. There is somebody that loves him and will, pay up to go and get him. And if you can sell that and say, 26% targets per route run rate, and kind of get that second plus, then I think he's an absolute sell for me. So yeah, I kind of agree with you that there's some risk there, some stuff not to love, but you can't get past those underlying numbers, and there's a reason behind some of that hype. Well, that brings us to the end of the show, Scott. Thank you ever so much for coming on. Remind everybody watching, everybody listening, where can they find you? Where can they find your work?
So yeah, I write and I co-host a podcast for In Between Media. I also have a really silly YouTube series called Pulp Fantasy for In Between Media, where me and Ariel, she's at Trash Sandwiches on Twitter. If you're not following her, you should be. She's awesome. We just make fun of stuff with movie clips and TV clips, and we tie in football and fantasy football. It's really, really fun. So I do that, and then I write for Fantasy Data NFL. I have a ongoing series called Beneath the Surface, where it's not that clever of a name. I really do deep dives statistically. Not necessarily a lot of takes, not necessarily a lot of start sit type things. More just I like to look at historical trends and look at try and decipher what some of the data that has been piling up is telling us. So I also have a Patreon. If you want to sub to that, that'd be cool. I do a lot of data dumps on Patreon, and I do a lot of in-season stuff on Patreon as well. And thanks for having me, man. This is great.
Thank you so much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. You're far too modest to say it, but your Patreon is fantastic. I am Thanks, a subscriber.
So is yours, by the way. So is yours.
Appreciate that. Love the data deep dives. So if you're not, go and check out Scott. He does fantastic work. He's at Munda Difflin FF on Twitter. Hit that subscribe button if you're not, and we'll be back very soon.